victory!
Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Dial It Up. Today we're going to be talking about a couple of the golden rules that are present in Heroclix, and we're going to go over replace, then modify, and the rule of three. Now both of these are rules that can trip up veteran players just as easily as they trip up newer players, because these are rules that got instituted after the game actually started. So it was a couple of years in playing the game that these rules suddenly got put into play. So there are players that have started from the beginning that don't think of the rule as much as someone that's just learning the game. So both of these come into play when you calculate combat totals. And there's a couple of things that go into the actual calculation, and the one thing to note is that combat values totals aren't actually calculated until they are needed. So your attack value isn't actually calculated until you attack. Your defense isn't calculated until you're defending against an attack, and your damage isn't calculated until you actually hit. Now this seems very arbitrary, but it does actually come into play when you're considering when things happen and which order they happen in, and that's why all of these calculations have to happen as they're happening. So replace and modify is one of the first things during your calculations, is to find out whether your combat value is going to be a replacement value. Now replacement values are not always easy to spot, because with the game language in this game, they don't always stay consistent, and it doesn't always just say replace your value. Replacement values are anything that is halved, anything that is doubled, anytime it says equal to this, or becomes this, or this character has this. You see where I'm getting at, where these are just complicated ways of saying replace this value. So there are powers just right out of the pack that have replacement values, and that's going to be charge and running shot. They both have a replacement value on the movement. Hypersonic speed has a replacement value on the range, and pulse wave has a replacement value on the damage. Now there are two different types of replacement values. There's going to be your standard replacement value and then your locked replacement value. And your locked replacement value doesn't come into play as often, but those are replacement values that don't come into play when you do the replace then modify rule, because when they're locked, they can't be modified. So they are just, that is what that total is going to be. And that's when you have characters that have Quake with a locked value of 2, or Blaze Claw's Fangs with a locked value of whatever your D6 roll is going to be. The other thing we're looking at replacement values is, now these are the easier ones to do, the double, then the halved, and becomes. The harder ones are when you get special items or special powers that say, however it's worded, the sniper rifle, this says this character has 10 range. That is a replacement value. Now the errata on that was added that this is now the first replacement value that you have to do. So if you have, we're looking at hypersonic speed, where you're halving your range, with a sniper rifle you're going to do this one first to 10, and then half it with the hypersonic speed range.
She gets hypersonic later.
Now that was the errata that got taken into account with the sniper rifle, because before, when you have multiple replacement values, much like anything in Heroclix that happens simultaneously, you get to choose what order it happens in, which caused a lot of problems when the sniper rifle first came out. That is a different rant for another day. Another thing is special powers like Proximity Midnight, whose range is equal to the amount of tokens that she has on her card. And that's a replacement value. Some people don't always realize that when the wording is such as this is equal to this, that is actually a replacement value. Sometimes you get lucky And sometimes you have a character like Lightning Lad or Electro, whose special power actually uses the word replaces. When his arc lightning, when you replace your range, or when you replace the damage with his printed damage. So now we've talked about the replacements. All of those, when you're doing your calculations, happen first. So you do all your doubling, your halving, your equal to, and then you modify. So that's when you bring into your perplex or anything else. The other replacement pack power that I forgot to bring character for is defend. That is a replacement power, a replacement value where you are replacing that character's defense with the defend character's defense. I should have brought a Dara down for that. So then we get into the modifications, and so mostly it's your perplex up or down. Either you're perplexing your value up and your opponent's perplexing it down, or you have a special power that's modifying, anything like that. The good thing about modifications is that they're very clear in the wording as to whether something is a modification. It'll either say the word increase, decrease, +1, -1, or even just the word modify. They don't get overly complicated with the language on that like they do with the replacement. So you replace it and then you modify it. Why this is important, why this is actually really good to think in when you're doing stuff is, say, take a character like the Hulk who's got an 8 movement and on a charge. So normally that 8 movement would be halved and he'd have a 4 movement charge. But if you use the replace the modify, then that movement is now going to be, say we perplex him up 1. His movement is replaced to 4, and then we modify it up to a 5. So now he has a 5 charge. So a lot of people generally think of when you're perplexing up a value like that is that you do it at the beginning where his movement would be perplexed up to a 9 and then be halved. In this particular case, that would actually help. But if he had started with a 9 and half to 5, if you perplex it up to a 10, half to 5, it would be the same thing. But because you replace the modify, it actually does make a difference. The other thing to take into account, like I was saying about doing all of your replacement values first, is if someone like this who doesn't ignore hindering is trying to charge out of hindering, moving out of hindering already halves your movement. Charge halves your movement. So then this 8 becomes 4, becomes 2, and then your modifications. And the other thing I'm going to touch on is the rule of 3, which is actually one of the more simpler golden rules to keep in mind and memorize, is that whatever modifications you're doing, plus or minus, a combat value can never be more than +3 or less than +3. It's always capped at that. So even if one of the easiest examples is equipping 2 hammers with the Book of Skulls. Now, it says that that would be +2 and +2, which would be a +4, but you can't have +4, you're going to cap at +3. But the one thing on that, because all modifications are calculated at the same time, if you do have +4 from 2 hammers on the Book of Skulls, and your opponent perplexes down your attack, then it's the +4 -1, you're still going to be at 3. So even if you only get capped at that 3, anything you have past that 3 is still taken into account when you're doing your calculations. The other thing of note with the rule of 3 is that it's only subject to combat values. There's only 5 combat values in the game. There's movement, attack, defense, damage, and range. Which means when you get into things like damage dealt, it's not your damage value, it's damage dealt, and that is not subject to the rule of 3. But that is for another episode. So hopefully I've covered this extensively for you guys and you have a better idea of what is considered a replacement value and when you do these calculations to help you out in the game. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more episodes from us.